How's it going, folks? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards, and today we're taking a look at the 11th God of Commander tournament, 159 player event that happened over in Japan just this past weekend. These tend to be super popular. These are some of my favorites to do. Kind of been a minute since I've made a video and have been kind of slacking, but there's lots of fun stuff I want to be talking about. And you know, this is just, I have to record these. These are the best things I do. At least some of my favorites that I do. So I've come down from the mountaintops. You can see the big beard, and I'm here to bring you some Japanese tech. Hopefully, I've taken a little bit of a look at a couple of these lists, and there's some pretty exciting stuff. There's some cool decks. We're missing some favorites, especially of mine. No Rog Tevish this time, but we have another cool Rog deck that we get to look at. And again, for the second time in a row now, we have a new God of Commander. A little bit of a spoiler, but you know, stay till the end. You'll see the new deck that took this down. I'm going to be trying to give especially repeat lists or lists that are, you know, a little bit more standard, a little bit less time, and get to focus more on stuff like the meta breakdown, some of the new tech that we're starting to see, as well as new lists that show up, and some of this other stuff too. I'm going to link to some articles about this event, because there's some pretty cool things that we're going to get to go over here alongside the meta breakdown. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know down below which of these decks were your favorite, what you want to see from me. Consider supporting me over on Patreon. It helps me do this kind of stuff for you guys, as well as get access to deck tech videos, coaching. A lot of people have been hitting me up for coaching. I've been playing a lot more recently, got a couple more wins under my belt, doing some more of the Rog Thrust stuff, you know, especially if you want some Rog Thrust prep, either hit up me or, you know, Sam Black. All that being said though, let's go ahead and hop into it with the meta breakdown. Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try. So, metagame breakdown. We get these now for the God of Commander events. Getting lots of information. These are actually becoming some of the best covered events. Not really so much over here. Like a lot of times, like navigating to these links isn't always the easiest stuff to find, looking for the articles, but they're here. The information is out there. Like I mentioned, we have 159 participants with one fairly standout popular deck being Tymna Kraum. 11 people playing Tymna Kraum. Not the craziest, less than 10%, so not like a massive showing for that deck, but it is quite popular. And we have 3 decks with 6 entrants. Kennen, the Prodigy of the Devil. One of my favorite things about these is reading the Google Translate things of like Najeela, the Blade Bloomer, Kennen, Malcolm Vile, and Tymna Thrasios coming in second, all with 6 entries. And you can see there's a lot of 4s, some 3s, 2s, and a ton of 1s. Players talk about our metagame over here being diverse. I don't think I've ever seen this many 1-ofs. I mean, that's a lot. Maybe it's because I haven't been looking at as many super large events, because there aren't always a ton of those to look at. Kind of relevant for Japanese coverage is that not all decks that are popular over here are popular over there. Decks like cEDH tend to be underrepresented relative to kind of what we think of them in terms of what like a metagame menace it is. Magda as well, though it is showing up 4 of them here. We got 4 Iron Mans. None of those made it, unfortunately, so no Iron Mans to get to talk about yet. If you want me to talk about Iron Man, somebody top 16 with it. Come on now. Some Najeelas. Derevi tends to be very popular over there. Rog Tevish with a couple, but yeah, really diverse stuff going on over there. Like I said, lots of 1-of. There's a lot of monocolor decks. We got Crick. There's a Chainer over there. Yawgmoth, the Doctor of Slan. I don't think deck lists get submitted. Like, you can't look at all of them like you can on EDH Top 16. If they do exist out there, I don't know about it. Let me know if you have links to all of the deck lists submitted. But that's it for our meta breakdown. Generally pretty diverse meta. Seeing Malcolm Vile, which I don't think has been super popular, is kind of interesting. Another thing I want to highlight is these player breakdown articles, or whatever you want to call them, player profiles. Let's take a look at those. So here, again, I'm going to have this linked in the description. If I forget, yell at me. We've got player profiles of the players who placed in the top 12. Again, if you're not familiar, this is your first time here, the way that these tournaments are structured is a little bit different, where players play in a open Swiss like we do, but they have a point system where everyone starts with the same amount of points. And then when you win a game, you earn the rest of the table's points. When you lose, somebody else gets your points. And when you draw, everybody loses a little bit of points. So you don't want to draw, you want to win. You're very much pushed to do it. And at the end of the Swiss, the 12 players with the most points will go cut to top 12, where each of them will get put into a pod similar to us. But we don't have top 16 because the previous winner, or the God of Commander, will be there ready to go. That's kind of what they earn as part of their prize, is they get to go straight to the top 4 of the next game. So it's a kind of a cut to find the top 3, and then they will face off against the previous God of Commander. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but I did want to just highlight that this kind of stuff is cool, where they're asking players shops they're in, communities that they belong to, some of their favorite decks, some of their previous achievements that they've got in the format or in just Magic in general. Goes over their records, like what they found to be the best performing card, often with weird names like Rain-Soaked Traveler. I would not have guessed Weathered Wayfarer. It makes sense now that I see it. Also just odd that that was the best deck card. But this is the kind of info that people usually want to see more of. Like there is coverage of these events, but you can't see a ton of it, and there's not a ton of like on the ground coverage over there. I've talked to some players in Japan about maybe going over there and trying to do some of that coverage. If that's something you're interested in, please let me know. There might be something I even look into kind of crowdfunding, because I know people really love getting to see those kind of things, and I would love being able to get to do that. But this is just really sick. You can see what is your main achievements. 5-time God of Commander. Yeah, the Ryuji here, who was just destroyed with Tymna Kraum almost every single time. And top this event as well. Best card, Ristic Research. I can figure that one out. I could have told you that one, Ristic Study. But this is just a really cool thing where you can see, and giving some spoilers of decks that got there, you know, maybe Marath, and another Weathered Wayfarer Enjoyer, maybe a card that we're sleeping on over here. But really cool stuff here that I'd like to see more of. Is one thing I really wanted to see pushed when we saw like the top deck leaderboard that eventually came up, was seeing more about the players and building those storylines and getting people to care, because I think coverage is such a huge part of getting people to care about events. And I know firsthand that players getting covered is a huge thing for them. Players reach out to me all the time that they're so hyped that they ended up in a video of mine or someone else's, or like when I did commentary, they loved that they finally got to get featured on stream, and they loved getting to hear like me or, you know, someone else like Shawnee get to talk about their deck. And it's just a huge thing for players. They love winning in the cloud of that, but part of the cloud is also like other people knowing and other people getting to see it. And also just even when you didn't win, just being able to point to like, yep, this is the time that I played on stream. It's always there. This little piece of proof of like this moment for me is like kind of, you know, part of my history as a player. It's forever etched online, and you can always go see it and point people to it. And that's just awesome. People love that kind of stuff, and players like learning more about the game through people. And it's a part of the format that I think needs to grow the same way you see players love people like Reed Duke. They like watching Gabe Nassif and Mingu. You know, you would kind of want that for cEDH at a certain point. And this kind of thing helps do that, and it helps people understand that games and tournaments aren't just like the results at the end. They're, you know, the players there and their experiences are more than just like the record they got at the end of the day. But I'm here, the final boss of the record of the end of the day, to declare who was good and who wasn't. I mean, not really, but in our 12th place, again, remember, this is a cut to top 12. So I'm going to have the 12th place, and then the returning god, I kind of just throw them as their own result. And then, of course, the winner, the current new God of Commander. First up, we're talking about Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow. Aito, new card from Duskmourn. That is a pretty popular ninja. Slotted in pretty easily into these Yuriko shells. Like a lot of Yuriko decks, they're going to have typically evasive, but at the very least, cheap attackers to help them ninjutsu and Yuriko and other ninjas quickly. Typical play pattern, of course, is turn 1 evasive guy like a Changeling Outcast, turn 2 Yuriko. Get the thing going. And then if you have good ETBs like Fairy Seer or Fairy Dream Thief, all the better, because they're likely to go in and out of your hand. We don't see any really big creatures like the 15 mana Goober, Shadow of Mortality. But we do see evasive enablers and other ninjutsu kind of empowering cards like Satoru, Tetsuko. Of course, you got the Thassa's Oracle. Other ninjas, which Covert Technician is not one I've seen that's been super popular, but deals combat damage to your player. Put an artifact card mana value less than or equal to that damage from your hand on the battlefield. That's a cool one, especially if you're like a Yuriko who's wanting to do like One Ring stuff. We'll have to keep in mind what kind of artifacts it's doing. I know the One Ring is really popular in Japan. Also, cards like Manifold Key, Artifact Untappers is a big theme over there that they're really all about. Nothing crazy wild here in the Yuriko creature base. We are on the 29 creatures. Sorceries, we do have some big ones, but I do consider most of these castable, or at least they have some utility, right? Seagate Restoration, probably not going to cast it, but that's a land. It's a Yuriko land that's flips and hits them for 7. Temporal Trespass, I'd say is uncastable, but I had it cast against me at a tournament I just played this past weekend. It can be cast. It happens. I've seen it happen. Temporal Mastery. So you do have a little bit of that, but for the most part, the sorceries are relatively castable, or MDFCs, or something like Step 3 that has utility. Instance, Abjure, stack a blue permanent counter target spell. Wow, okay. I mean, you do have little dinky dudes that are very sackable. That's kind of like a Flare of Denial equivalent, where you just pay 1 blue. And it could be a token, not that this deck can really generate a lot of blue tokens. Consign to Memory, possibly a card to consider more. I think if you're considering Stifle in your deck, or some Stifle effect, Consign to Memory might be one to think about. Counters the one ring is the one thing that's usually good enough to counter for colorless spells. That's a card to think about. Brainstorm's pretty popular there. We got Rot Reunion. I don't know this one. Black instant, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. It's a graveyard hate. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, which is it can't block when it attacks, you sack it. And then it has Flashback. I'm having trouble speaking today. I haven't recorded in so long. I'm just struggling. I just don't even remember how to read Magic cards. Seems okay. It's not the best bit of graveyard hate. I'm kind of curious. I guess it being recursive and making bodies could kind of go over the line over something like Surgical Extraction or Extirpate, I think is the second one. Seems reasonable. Force of Despair. I'd never seen this art. This looks insane. This is sick. This is one of the only decks you tend to see that. Tons of free, cheap removal and interaction. Mainstay of Yuriko's. When you see Commandeers or Misdirections, these are the decks you're most likely to see it in. Blink Moth Infusion. They usually don't run that many artifacts. They're on 7. So this is basically just here as a 14 drop. Then Oblivion, Brolic, lots of free stuff. Aether Vial is a card I've been seeing a little bit of. I've heard talk of it in like decks like Yuriko, things like Derevi as well. Being able to get around uncounterability, pretty hot to just put in an uncounterable Thoracle or sneak it into play. Can really help with in a sort of flash meta that we might be in. Don't see flash enablers like Born Upon a Wind, so this can be a way to kind of do that. Enchantments, we got the typical Mystic Ristic, and then Smoke Shroud, which is 2 mana aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and flying. Whenever ninja you control enters, you may return Smoke Shroud from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to that creature. So that helps your ninjas stay evasive, and then when you ninjutsu out a ninja and like this leaves the battlefield, falls off, you put in another ninja, pop, new Smoke Shroud for you. That's kind of cool. Very thematic card. 28 lands with a lot of MDFCs. Nothing too wild in the mana base. It is a Tainted Pack mana base, but yeah, Yuriko here getting it done. 11th place. I think we have a repeat. Pretty sure we had a Pako and Haldan last time, and here we go. Notable thing with Pako and Haldan, traditionally it is a deck because of the way the commanders work, where Pako exiles the top card and Haldan lets you get non-creature cards from them, including lands. You tend to see a lower creature count in Pako and Haldan, which I think can kind of be bait. I think Pako and Haldan, you don't need to hit cards from your deck for it to be good, and there aren't creatures that are like must-have win cons. Like we can see them here. There's no creature that if you exile it, you're like, oh my god, I'm screwed. So I don't think you need to do that. And also green is at its most powerful when it gets to use creatures. Like green Cradle decks are a very major part of the format. So I think building into those strengths, running 18 creatures in your green mid-range beatdown deck, pretty reasonable thing to do. So we've got a good selection of 1 mana dorks. We got 6 of them. Sylvan Safekeeper, protect our stuff, Tenderwall to help us accelerate. Big thing for this deck was losing Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt. Like you'll hear me say about a lot of decks. You'll tend to see a decent amount of cards that either get some value off of lands or especially let you play multiple lands, because Pako is so likely to exile a land from the top. The whole table on average is playing like 28 lands. More than likely, you're going to see like 1 land per each hit. So often you're going to have more lands than you know what to do with. So getting a Souza, exploration, things like that can be really good. One I haven't really seen is Uro coming in. We're really taking advantage of the lands. We have Uro and cEDH. There's also probably some nonsense we can get up to with this. We'll have to look into it, but that is a good recursive value-based beater that lets us do more shenanigans with the lands. There you go. I don't know what else the Uro is here for other than just being a pretty good guy. We'll see what else we might be able to do with it. Colossal Sky Turtle and then Emrakul, popularized over in the Japanese meta. Very good at breaking mid-range games. Pako and Haldan can get up to a lot of mana. Cast an Emrakul, break the game. Sorcery is another part of Pako and Haldan. You tend to see your extra turn spells. You can often cast multiple of them because you get one, you cast it, Noxious Arrival back to the top, take the extra turn, get it again, keep them going. Same with extra combat spells. So we have a bunch of those. J-Will and Rite of Flame for mana. Seasons Past. I don't know what this card does. 6 mana, return any number of cards with different converted mana costs from your graveyard to your hand. Put Seasons Past onto the bottom of its owner's library. So this lets us not run out of cards and also lets us get back a whole bunch of cards we've used up potentially. Instance, we got that Noxious I mentioned. Legolas's Quick Reflexes, which is pretty nice. Very hard to interact with. Deflecting SWAT art that I didn't know existed. I don't know how I'm learning these things just now. Siege Smash, split second spell. decent utility. You might do the actual trample thing. Pako itself does not have trample. It gets very, very large and has haste, but doesn't have trample. So you will sometimes see trample enabling effects or effects that make it unblockable so that you can get a player dead. Delayed Blast Fireball is hot because if you cast it through Haldan, you just get the full, doesn't matter if you only spent 3 mana, you get the full 5 damage to everything and to all your opponent's stuff and to them. Free interaction, Submerge, Nexus, Misdirection. Well, Nexus is not free interaction, an extra turn spell, but we already explained why those are here. Artifacts, not a ton. We got the 8. Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, One Ring, no keys so far in this. Enchantments were on the carpet, Exploration, like I mentioned, Sprawl and Wild Growth as ways to ramp, Ristic, Solven, and Copy Artifact. 34 lands, relatively high. Like I mentioned, you want to take some extra land drops, and running extra lands helps keep those things as live cards that are decent even when your Pako and Haldan engine isn't set up. A couple unique lands we've got here. Crystal Vein to help speed us up. Beseiju, who shelters all, which makes an instant sorcery uncounterable, but does enter tapped. Kessig Wolf Run to give our big old commander trample. Plaza of Heroes is some fixing for legends and just has a whole bunch of text. Make our commander hard to deal with. Untadeki, I believe is how you pronounce this. I don't know. Enters tapped, pay 2 life, add 2 to your mana pool, spend this only to cast legendary spells. So like an Ancient Tomb that comes in tapped, but works for our commanders. Okay. Urza's Cave to find us other lands. Got the Guy's Cradle, which again, if you're on like a very, very low creature count version of this deck, might not be the best land, but here we definitely can support it with our creature count. I know it wasn't super popular before, and with the losing of a lot of the mana enablers and best cards in Temur, some people kind of moved on, didn't like playing it anymore, didn't feel the power there. But this player here is sticking with it, and we've had, I believe, 2 back-to-back God of Commanders with Pako and Haldan in the top 10, or top 12, whatever. So might still have something going for it. Maybe something to keep in mind. Next up, we're looking at Rogsai, and it's pretty different. We already see 9 creatures. So at the very least in our creature count, it's quite different. We see little value engine creatures and things like Dark Confidant, Fairy Mastermind, Talion, and most hot of all, Dark Star Augur, 2 and a black, Offspring of Black. So you can pay an additional black as you cast it. You get an extra 1/1 copy of it. Flying, beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library, lose life equal to its mana cost, goes to your hand. Dark Confidant, that for 4 mana, you get 2 Dark Confidants, basically. I think this is pretty hot. I think this is pretty sick. Not the last time we're going to see this card, this breakdown. And I like the idea of, our turbo plan is weakened a bit. Let's just get a little bit of mid-range because we have no card advantage in the command zone, typically. Let's just get a little bit built into our deck that isn't super slow. It overlaps with our ad nauseum plan. We have fairly low CMC of our deck. So let's take advantage of that with these effects. Dark Confidant itself doesn't look great into like Bowmasters. Same with Fairy Mastermind. But I think just a little bit of these, they're also not that scary to deploy, so you can kind of get a little bit of advantage on these in the early game and then get a bunch of cards, and then Rogsai with cards usually just wins the game. It's kind of broken. Sorceries were only on the 1 wheel. That's very notable, so you could kind of consider these sort of Dark Confidant effects as taking that slot, or Talion as well. Traditionally, you see 3, sometimes 4 wheels in these. Usually Wheel, Twister, Windfall is expected, and then sometimes like Wheel of Misfortune. We do have the tutors the deck's known for, Peagrass, Beseech the Mirror. We're missing the Yawgmoth Pool, that's also a staple of this deck, and Mnemonic Betrayal, which is starting to become a little bit less of a staple. I've talked about in a couple videos so far because graveyards just don't get churned through quite as much in less of a turbo focused meta. So there's just a little bit less gas in the graveyards typically than we used to see. And I've seen it in games. I'm seeing more meme bets pitched to Chrome mocks or just Rotten Hand, and we're seeing less of that card. Kind of wild not to see it in Rogsai of all decks, which can usually do things like Storm Off, Brain Freeze, meme bet you, and is kind of known for those play patterns. Instance, we got Offer You Can't Refuse, Dispel, Into the Flood Maw, Rain of Filth. This deflecting slot will always just stand out to me. Okay, it's going to take some while to get used to that. The days we expect, so a little bit different of a interactive land here. Rain of Filth, a card that we've seen in some of these lists. I think the more mid-range you build, the better it looks. Rain of Filth is a card I've been a fan of, but when you're in like the 23 land Rogsai trying to win turn 2 plan, it's kind of terrible. If we have a higher land count here and we're doing a little bit slower of a game plan that's a little bit more consistent, then I start to like Rain of Filth a lot better. Lines up very well with Underworld Breach, things like that. We're on the Cycryph, which has not been a Rogsai stable in quite a while. On Final Fortune, also notably, none of the other extra turn effects, no Last Chance, no Warrior's Oath. I can't believe I missed that. Nobody even reminded me. What the heck, guys? No Force of Negation. Artifacts, 19 of them. We are on the Ring, Monolith. We're on Felwar Stone with 2 talismans. A lot of times over here, players will opt for the 3 talismans in these colors instead of Felwar Stone to be more consistent access to your colors. We're on the Sensei's top. That's kind of interesting. You don't tend to see that over here. No keys, and we are on the defense grid, Mamber, all the kind of fast mana you'd expect to see. Enchantments, we got the power balance, so no Necrodom, we got power balance instead. Curious how this one played out. I'd like to hear about that one. The rest of these, to be expected, super powerful cards. Underworld Breach and Future Sight Frame, so hot. And then 27 lands, which is a way more like TNK, whatever, like traditional land count in non-Rockside decks in this format. Got the Emergent Zone. I love it. Oh yeah, we also didn't have Valley Floodcaller here as another flash enabler. So less all in on the plan. I'm sure we're still on Born Upon a Wind, right? Yeah, of course. Born Final Fortune, but no Floodcaller. Interesting. And then we got Forbidden Orchard. You hate to see it. Phyrexian Tower. Urza Saga. Saga, when I was testing, made me kind of more inclined to put things like keys in there. And then the more I was on that kind of stuff, it got me wanting to play things like Dramatic Reversal. That's the thing to consider. Being able to go get Sensei's Top, Soul Ring, Vault, your LED. Like there is a decent amount of flexibility. It's mostly mana or Sensei's Top, which doesn't seem the most impactful. We've seen some Rock-Size playing Vexing Bauble, so that's a card to consider as well when you're on Urza Saga. But yeah, 27 lands, more mid-rangey Rock-Size build here doing quite well at this very large event. We got Gitrog Monster here doing it again. I'm going to compare and see how similar this is to the last version of this that I covered. So the same player here rocking the same card. It's very exhausting to go through Gitrog and every single land and try to figure out how all this shenanigans works. You typically, not to discount Gitrog Monster, I think it's awesome. I like highlighting it. I do think in general, land strategies are really an interesting place to be in right now, because they can typically avoid the weaknesses to draw engines that some other decks that take a lot of game actions open themselves up to. We're in a very heuristic study focused metagame. Good to avoid that. So we had Vines of Vastwood and Lotus Cobra get cut for Archdruid's Charm, which is a card that you kind of expect to see in a deck like Gitrog Monster. Find you creatures, lands, removes problematic permanents, whether there be creatures by like biting them or, exiling artifacts or enchantments. And then Soul Innervation, which is 3 and a black, flash. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. Whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Kind of pulling double duty here on being a card that we can just loop through our deck with Gitrog Monster Dread shenanigans, and the table will die without having to target them. Gets around 1 ring. And also being a removal spell. This list is virtually identical to the last one I covered. I am going to look through it again to give people just a good rundown of Gitrog, but I didn't want to spend quite as much time as I did on that last time. Especially the lands focused lists have so much overlap and shenanigans. It's just kind of so hard to go through, and especially because I'm not a Gitrog or Lumra expert, decks like that. But in the creatures, we have discard enablers like their News Constrictor, Putrid Imp, Wild Mongrel, good Golgari cards like Oppo, Bowmasters, 6, ESG, Endurance, whether, staple status or not, perfectly fits into a Golgari deck doing lands, graveyard looping shenanigans. We've got our Eldrazi Titans so that we can loop our deck. Extra land effects like Oracle Moldiah, dredge effects like Golgari Grave Troll, because that's what Gitrog Monster do. That's what he's here for. Tutors to make us consistent. Calling Ritual, because it's the only thing you can do to punish these greedy mid-range decks, pumping out all these rocks and draw engines and garbage. Like I mentioned, Tutors, lots of removal. We're in good colors for it. Realms Uncharted is a card that consistently seems to pop up in these lands focused strategies. I mean, it's Gibson given for lands, of course it does. Not too many artifacts, but we're mostly doing land ramp or creature ramp, not digging too deeply into artifact mana. Burgeoning, card I love. Exploration, Oblivion Crown being a discard enabler as well. Walk-in Closet, which is just like everything this deck wants to do. I don't know how often they actually use the Yawgmoth's Will side of it, because that does shut off the graveyard, which is typically, kind of a no-no for this kind of deck, but it might come up. And then 45 lands. Take your pick on which is your favorite. Is it Bazaar of Baghdad? Fabled Passage? Kind of wild that one's here. Hickory Woodlot? Talon Gates? That one's my favorite. You guys know that. Tranquil Thicket. Lands with cycling. Super powerful in this kind of deck. This deck takes advantage of like every utility land printed recently with Horizon of Progress, Talon Gates, you can use Homeward Path in case you get Gilded Drake, which we haven't seen one here so far, but we have seen like a lot of Vilepel Stormdrake, especially in the Japanese meta. If you want a more detailed card by card breakdown, this list was virtually identical to the last God of Commander video. Check that one out. like I mentioned before, I want to give more time to decks that I haven't featured yet. So let's get on to the next one. But great work on, again, getting another top result with Gitrog Monster in this blue focused metagame. And here at 8th place, we've got Tymna Kraum, the first tile we've got of the tournament. 15 creatures. This is the creature count we're coming to expect more of. We got Loyal Apprentice, tends to mean when I see that, Facebreaker, Rev, Delny. This is very Tymna focused, very farmy. Tishana's Tidebinder is a card that we see can just pop up. It can interact with people in ways they're not ready for, disrupting things they don't expect to get disrupted. Can kind of just go into blue decks as you feel that they're necessary. I think this was the player who said that Rev was the highest performing card for them in the player profile. This is a card I haven't got to talk about a ton of, but I also haven't seen it that much. Like, it came out and got a lot of talk about it. I don't think it's like super breaking the metagame. It's a 4-drop creature, but it does seem quite good. Sorceries. We got the Jessica's Will. Always love to see that in a TNK. Imp Seal, DT, Diabolic Intent. So tutors, no wheel effect at all. Kind of a theme here so far is low on the wheels. Sevrek for Intuition Breach nonsense. Gamble. Instance, another offer player, and Dispel here. Both the blast. Another bit of Rain of Filth. I like the Rain of Filth. I didn't know there was Amonkhet Sword Splashers art. Have I not made a video in the past like 2 years? Does every card just have new art? We are on the Culling the Week, which I like to see too. Usually in these kind of decks, these are the kind of cards that, like, they're not turbo all in. Oh, I'm going to turn 2 Rain of Filth to enable a super fast win. It's often just these are the cards that let you have that not too scary, I'm the good guy here position, and then convert that into explosive win behind a silence effect. And then sometimes it could just be like a turn 2 Nas or Necrode, you know, depending on how this deck is structured. We're on the Limdual's Vault. You don't tend to see TNK dig that deep, but they are here. And then we've got the Nas and Deadly Rock, really respecting the creature decks. Not a staple of TNK, but, you know, it pops up. Artifacts, no One Ring. We're on Jeweled Amulet in Tymna Kraum. I've never seen a Tymna Kraum with the Jeweled Amulet. This is usually what you see in like monocolor or 2-color decks at most. Spin 1 and tap it, put a charge counter on it, and you must note the type of mana spent to pay this activation cost. Activate only if there's no counters on it, and then you can remove a charge counter from it by tapping it at 1 mana of the color. So basically, spin 1, remember what color you got. Next turn, you tap it, and you get the mana of that color. Kind of lets you sink mana into it a little bit. Can be kind of nice to have like early plays with your mana that even if you're not developing too much, can help you set up for early mana though. Just use this, you know, spin 1. Get the mana next turn. Got the Petal, LED, Mana Vault, no Grim Monolith. We are on Mopal with only 11 artifacts. I guess Jeweled Amulet is part of the concession there. There's not many talisman effects, which I would think is a little better than Jeweled Amulet, but not really sure. Enchantments, we got a couple that are not the most common. We got the staples, no Necropotence, and then we have Dress Down, respecting the creature decks, can be really good to deal with stuff, you know, like shut down a Draenith while you breach, things like that. And then Monologue Tax, when an opponent casts their second spell each turn, make a treasure. Just a little Smothering Tithe at home. Lotho is great. This is a Lotho on an enchantment. It just doesn't trigger for your stuff. Can't attack with Tymna, but it's not as susceptible to removal or getting Bowmastered, things like that. 28 lands. We're on the Cavern of Souls. We're on Horizon of Progress too. Okay, so it is a land that it has sort of the reflection pool effect. It makes mana of that your lands could already produce. Sack it to draw a card like the Horizon lands, and you can use it. You're just sitting around holding up mana. Nobody does anything. Don't think it's your window to fire off like an Intuition. Put a land into play. You get a little bit of ramp. Okay, curious how that's played out here. It does look like there were some budget constraints here because I don't see like bad lands. There's only 2 of the actual dual lands, and we see more shock lands and, like I mentioned, the Horizon of Progress. So these events are non-proxy, so that does make sense. Some concessions to budget here, and still getting it done in your Nas deck running the Shocklands. Like I've mentioned, we've seen it in like Sisse's, but here where the life really does add up. And it does make sense too to not be on Necro when this deck already isn't the best Necropotence deck in the world, and you know that you have some budget constraints and you're running more painful lands in your mana base. So I think that makes sense. Not letting budget entirely dictate everything you can do, but at the same time noting that that is a part of your deck list, building around that and kind of its strengths, and then looking for other things to try out because, you know, if I can't run bad lands or whatever, maybe there's something else to some of these more affordable cards and I can try that. All right, this is the deck I'm most excited to take a look at. That is Rog Tymna. This is a deck I've been thinking about lately. I just really like Rogue Rack. I'm really big on more proactive leaning strategies. You know, I play a lot of Rog Thras, which is pretty proactively constructed, but isn't like a turbo deck by any means. And this might be the next little project I have is, you know, Rog Tymna had a very good weekend over in the US as well. I think there were like 3 in the top 16, at least 2, plus this one. Maybe something to think about there. So, Rogue Rack, the most broken commander in our format, and Tymna, probably top 3 most broken commanders in our format. Don't necessarily synergize that great because Rog, while an amazing attacker, doesn't typically deal combat damage to our opponents, so something to consider. But he's an enabler of the best cards in the format: Deflecting Swat, Flare of Duplication. We don't get a Fierce Guardianship here, but we do get Deadly Rollick. Culling the Weak gets a lot better, things like that. So let's take a look at what we're doing here. I'm so excited. We got Mimknight, free attacker for Tymna. Not the highest card quality in the world. Gets your Mopal online quickly. That's relevant. Staples like Esper Sentinel, Ragavan, Abolisher, Lotho. We're not going to talk as much about those. We have Archivist of Ogma, which comes up in any kind of like white deck that's looking to cast creatures at all and maybe draw cards. Not always a slam dunk staple, but is quite popular, especially in Japan, stuff like that, and Deep Known Terramancer you see. Insolent Neonate is a popular card typically in reanimator focused strategies. Being able to discard a card as a cost for activating an ability means that players are very, very unlikely to be able to interact with that. Basically, it's impossible to. It's going in the yard. They just might be able to surgical it or something. Curious to see what we're doing because there's no big creatures here. So I don't expect a reanimation effect like that to be relevant. Snarling Gorehound. This one's sick. A card I only know because I drafted Karlov Manor a good bit, which is 1 black, 1/1 menace, dog. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, surveil 1. So it's kind of like Dragon's Rage Channeler for creatures, while also being a menace attacker for your Tymna. I think it kind of hot. It kind of lines up fairly well. Get you a little bit of value on some of these derpy creatures that might not do you that much good. We have a ton of these, right? We get 2 Surveil triggers when Orcish Bowmasters enters the battlefield. Got the Dark Confidant showing up here as well. Loyal Apprentice. Braids, you guys know I'm a big Braids fan. This deck is just filled with like cards that I'm a big fan of. We got the Dark Star Augur showing up here as well, which I think this is such a great place for it. With Tymna, we get 2 attacking, flying Dark Confidants that are drawing me cards while they draw me cards. And then Brina the Demagogue. Who better to put your counters on with Brina than Rograk? This deck is built for me. A deck where I get to play Brina and Rograk. What more could I want in this world? I love it. I can't wait to build this. I'm so excited. Sorceries 13. Creature count is so this is I kind of cheated and looked at this because I was very excited. I don't know what else we got coming for us. We got Gamble, Imp Seal, Tutors. We expect to see Infernal Plunge, of course. Requisition Raid. I can lie and tell you I know what this card does. Free. So it costs a white, and then you can either pay +1 generic mana. You got to pay one of them to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player control. Rograk is a 1/2. I'm sold. I kind of like it. Sorcery speed, of course, it's a pretty big thing. Typically find yourself in a spot where you wish this was like Disenchant or something similar to be able to blow up stuff at instant speed. This doesn't look great against like an Underworld Breach, right? But the utility might be decent enough. I don't really think of destroy target artifact or enchantment as 2 different modes. Typically on a white card, you just see both of those together. Same with like green. Like these colors just kind of get to do both. So it's really a disenchant and a board wide kind of buff to your creatures that at sorcery speed. Not sure if it's quite worth it, but it is an interesting one to test in a deck, with 17 creatures that's trying to get in, that is concerned about like Orcish Bowmasters. Can I kind of eat a deck up like this? Can be quite nice. Rituals like J-Will, Rite of Flame. Scheming Symmetry tends to be popular in these like Mardu Tymna decks. Demonic Council, it's a DT if we've got Delirium. Snarling Gorehound setting us up right there. Artifact Creatures helping us get Delirium. Things like that. You got to consider it. We got Warrior's Oath, so at least 1 extra turn spell, assuming Final Force is also going to be here too. And then Grape Shot, which can be a win condition for a deck like this, can be their outlet at the end. Also, Grape Shot can just be quite good in a stormy kind of deck that needs to deal with some kind of piece of hate or just wants value when they go, like land, Mimknight, Infernal Plunge, Rograk into, like a Loyal Apprentice or something. And then at the end, just Grape Shot and like kill 2-3 creatures. Instance, we got Burnt Offering, which doesn't make more than 3 mana in this deck, but it's there. It is a ritual if you need it. Iffy on that one, it doesn't line up great with the Rog. You don't usually want to use it on Tymna, but it is a card that can be like a Culling the Weak at home that, can fix colors for us if needed. Slaughter Pack, not a card we see as much in cEDH now, but is always a consideration. Free removal is free removal. Typically see lots of silence effects in these kind of decks like Orange Chant, Silence. Sometimes we'll see Revel in Silence. Another Reign of Filth player, Cabal Writ, Soul Partition tends to show up in these kind of decks too. Wouldn't be surprised if we see like a Static Prison in here too. Even more reason for me to play this deck. Free Interaction and Ad Nauseam. We're not on Path to Exile, nothing like that. Makes me think we're not on Citadel. We're not. Fast mana, Skull Clamp. What more do I need? I just won a cEDH tournament playing this in Rog Thras. It's probably even better in this deck. Well, maybe not, but pretty good. Grinding Station for our Breaching, of course. Springleaf, no Paradise Mantle. Wishclaw Talisman, no One Ring. Might be something to consider. I kind of expect the Guild Artisan. So we have Call of the Ring. Beginning of your upkeep, the ring tempts you. I'm not going through all that, but you get to loot with it when a creature attacks. You get a ring bearer. Whenever you choose a creature as your ring bearer, you may pay 2 life if you do draw a card. So anytime the ring tempts you, you basically get to pay 2 life, draw a card on top of getting like more evasive creatures, looting, other little kind of minor upside on your creatures. Guild Artisan, one of the most misread cards in all of cEDH. Doesn't see a lot of play, but everyone who plays it seems to not know what it does. Commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, you create 2 treasure tokens. So you gotta attack a player who has the most life, not including you. One of the like cards with Rogue Rack that often can come up and I think lines up way better here than it does in like Rog Sai or Rog Thras, where some people talk about running it, because this is just your game plan anyways, is getting in with commanders. Lord Skitter's Blessing. No shot, I know what this thing does. 1 in a black, ETB, create a Wicked Roll token, which is that creature gets +1/+1, and when that aura is put into a graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life. Beginning of your end step, if you control an enchanted creature, you lose 1 life and you draw an additional card. Mostly better Phyrexian Arena. Oh, it's the beginning of your draw step. I said end step. Beginning of your draw step, if you control an enchanted creature, you lose 1 life and you draw a card. I get that this also is like buffing our Rogue Rack or whatever to get him to be like a really good attacker. Kind of curious how well this one's played out. It looks kind of niche, but I can see how it could line up. And then we got Breach Necro. Busted magic cards. 30 lands, fairly high for a Marty list. We're on City of Traders, E-Zone, just do it if you're net growing. Talon Gates, Japanese players know what's up. Urza Saga, we've got any surveil lands in the chat. Japanese players letting me down actively. I would like to see at least 1 surveil land probably, but overall, looks really sick. Cavern of Souls. I guess Cavern of Souls on humans pretty good. Really, really cool deck. I'm going to look at this and the other Rog Tymnas that did well this past weekend. Start working on my own list. I'm very excited to play this deck. I want to play another Rog deck and, win an event with it so I can add them to I could add Tymna to my panorama. Very excited to get to play this. So super sick deck. 6th place, we've got Heliod, a deck that pops up every now and then into top 16s. I've covered it a decent amount of times at this point. Kind of struggles to consistently have results. So I think it might more be that it's not that popular. It's one of those decks that I'm never surprised to see it in a top 16. I just don't expect to look at a top 16 and always see it. And if you're not familiar with this card, really the front side is kind of just flavor text. You really have to flip it to get the effects. Spells you control have flash, crazy, and spells you cast cost 1 less for each card your opponent has drawn this turn. Why he's called Heliod. Typically you do a wheel effect and then your spells cost 1,000,000 less mana and you get to play at flash speed. We got Azorius staples like Esper, Drannith, which is actually becoming way less of a staple. We're not seeing this in nearly as many decks recently. Boromir popping up. Boromir's nice because it's whenever an opponent casts a spell, so we can cast free spells like, if we make a spell skite cost 0 or whatever else, big colorless spell cost 0, Boromir doesn't counter it. We got the Ranger Captain, Recruiter of the Guard to tutor, Spellseeker to tutor, Hullbreaker Horde to just go off with some nonsense. Main card sticking out is Hydroelectric Specimen, which is in a 2-color deck, has reasonable text, and MDFCs are fairly free. And then Drafna, Founder of Latinum, which is 2 mana, spend 1 in a blue, return target artifact you control to its owner's hand, and you can spend 3 mana, tap it, copy target artifact spell you control. You could easily do both of these in a turn. This probably loops with like Coveted Jewel. First thing that comes to mind. Coveted Jewel could be free very easily. Taps for the 3 mana, draws you 3 cards, easily go through your whole deck and win. We're not on Thassa's Oracle as an outlet, so we'll have to find one because I don't see one here, but I'm sure we'll have one. Portent of Calamity. These kind of decks are the ones where you have to read cards. So we got a bunch of wheel effects. Echo, Twister, Days Undoing, Lunar Insight, draw a card for each different mana value among non-land permanents you control. Okay, we run a bunch of kind of weirdly costed permanents that we can discount, so that makes sense here. Solve the equation. Again, consider that a lot of these will be cheaper than they appear. It's pretty common that like this X on Prosperity could be like 5 and it not cost you any mana, and then the rest of your spells are basically free. Portent of Calamity is reveal the top X cards of your library. For each card type, you may exile a card of that type from among them. Put the rest in your graveyard. You may cast a spell from among the exile cards without paying its mana cost if you exiled 4 more cards this way. Why does this have so many declarative little like, oh, if you do this, then do that, then I'm doing my best, guys. Then put the rest of the exile cards into your hand. Spend a bunch of mana, or not really. You discount it with Heliod. Let's say we reveal the top 10. We get, for each card type, we get to exile a card. Then I put the rest into my graveyard. And then one of those spells you get to cast for free, and the rest that you exiled go into your hand. So we like casting things for free because we're going to run big spells. Sometimes we're not going to have the Heliod discount. Sometimes it's going to be beyond the scope of that, or it's going to be the mana pips like Seagate Restoration. Triple blue, you're going to run out of blue pips at some point. You don't discount those. Instance, white interaction, dramatic reversal is broken. Words of wisdom, you draw 2 cards and each other player draws a card. Makes your spells way cheaper. Lots of these kind of effects. Everybody's drawing cards. This one is super broken. Frantic Search, free spell that gets you to draw some cards, lets you find what you need. paradoxical outcome. I've been looking for a deck to get to play PO, and it's so sick. Commandeer, lots of free stuff. We're churning through our deck, so lots of interaction. We're giving people cards that is something to think about in a flash meta. Typically, we're going to get more out of it than they do, but we can't be doing that and not interacting, so we got to run lots of interaction too. Artifacts. These are the cards that are the easiest to break with Heliod, because if they're free, Chromatic Orrery solves our pip problems pretty easily. Coveted Jewel, like I mentioned, we can loop through with fairly easily. Sonic Screwdriver, we've seen a couple times in these Japanese lists. Talisman's Memory Jar does everything this deck is trying to do. First deck where we're seeing some of the keys here. They work great in a Coveted Jewel Chromatic Orrery one-ring deck. King God's Effigy is just a banger. Enchantments, we do have Blind Obedience. That's probably going to be our main outlet to kill people because of the extort. Then infinite mana, cast a spell over and over and over, get everybody dead. We're not seeing much of the copy enchantment effects that we have been seeing a lot of over in the US. Been seeing a decent amount of copy artifact. It seems like players over there kind of prioritize the one ring over like Rhystic Study, but we haven't seen any like Mirror Maids or copy enchantments, steel enchantments over here yet. Greater Oromancy is other enchantments you control have Shroud. That applies to your commander. Smothering Tithe, Rhystic Study, stuff like that get Shroud. 27 lands, including our MDFCs. Blue-white mana base. Mishra's Workshop works great in a deck like this. Very early one rings are, very possible. Relic of Legends, convert mana with like Grim Monolith, stuff like that. Makes a lot of sense in this kind of deck. And then kind of a traditional blue-white mana base for the most part. We got the Surveil land, all the fetches. Heliod, another deck that can just at any point pop up and get a top 16. And it's never surprising. Maybe just doesn't have the most players on it. Not sure what's holding it back from being like one of the defining decks. Blue-white, of course, doesn't have like the best shooters in the world. So you always have that. So there's always going to be maybe some issue with consistency, and it takes a little bit to get Heliod online. But once it's online, this card is nuts. Next up, we're looking at 5-color Queen Najeela in a very traditional looking creature base here with just the good cards for Najeela. The only thing that's kind of surprising is Elves of Deep Shadow. Most surprising thing here, high color dorks. Elves of Deep Shadow, I typically see like Noble Hierarch over that or something like that. Maybe that's a concession to get to include like Necropotence. Making sure all your dwarfs can tap for red. Might be red. Tap for black. But good stuff cards. Esper, Mockingbird, Ragavan, Tinderwall, the Spirit Guides, Grim Hireling, Samut, Kutzel, Derevi. These are just the must-run things. The only thing really missing here is Ranger Captain of Eos, which is a pretty notable exclusion, but maybe just trying to make some adjustments for the 5-color mana base, trying to make it work. Not too much pressure on it with too many double white spells. Sorceries, we got the Green Suns. It's a card I always talk up in these decks. DT, Diabolic Intent, Beseech the Mirror. So like I mentioned, that means I think we're more likely to be on Necropotence, and we are making concessions for double black and triple black spells in our deck list with the Elves of Deep Shadow over something like Noble Hierarch, which you might see, and why maybe you do see less of like double white spells. I do think there's definitely thought put into it. When I see the Elves of Deep Shadow, I don't assume they're just a goober and forgot that the Noble Hierarch exists. Pretty black heavy sorceries. No wheel effect. We are in the Sevirek though. Summoner's Pact, Offer You Can't Refuse, Culling the Weak, Dark Writ, Cabal Writ. We're on the Nas. On the Days. Okay. I see you. We're jamming. Born, Worldly, Silence. Crop rotation not super popular, but I'm imagining we're doing Crop Right E-Zone. 15 creatures with Najeela. Maybe it's more of consideration. Could also be on Talon Gates. Final Fortune Born. Intuition. We're on the Nas. 12 artifacts. On the Mopal. One ring is here. Enchantments. There's that Necropotence I talked about. Carpet, Wild Growth, Sylvan Library, Hive, Rhystic Mystic, Breach. Okay, most surprising here probably is Sylvan Library. I mean, we're green focused with our early turn plays, right? We see the Wild Growth, Carpet, all the dorks, Sylvan Library. Smothering Tithe to help us clean up some of this 5-color nonsense mana base. Necropotence, like I said, expected it to be here when I saw the Elves of Deep Shadow. Forbidden Orchard. Why would I give people blockers with my Najeela? I get it. 5-color mana base. There's that Emergent Zone we expected. No Talon Gates. We are on the Tarnished Citadel. No other utility lands here. Gaia's Cradle, that creature count. You'll also notice there is no Otawara. I'm surprised I noticed that, but I did. Again, you can only make so many concessions for your mana base before it stops working properly. But Seiju is the more broken of those effects. Makes sense to prioritize that. Green is the color we use to help get the rest of our mana going. Makes sense to prioritize that over Otawara, where early fish is usually kind of bait, and then it's hard to go turn one using our land to cast the Rhystic, so we don't care that much about that. Does it make sense to prioritize blue mana? Does it make sense to prioritize the worst channel land? And we're running a colorless card like Emergent Zone, Forbidden Orchard to kind of help the mana sing so that we can cast things like Beseech the Mirror and Necro. Maybe that means we're prioritizing our Najeela combo win a little bit less, but just something I like to highlight is these little decisions in deck building that you can usually if you know what to look for, kind of find the reasoning there, kind of hidden in there a little bit, you know. Smart deck building, best I can see, isn't just running 5-color good stuff and expecting it to all work. Can be an issue with 5-color decks. So I like the approach, experimenting with it. Did incredibly well at this event, Najeela the Blade Blossom. And then our last deck before we take a look at our top 4, we've got Derevi, another deck that's been super popular over in Japan. We got the Tezzeret, finding that One Ring. Weathered Wayfarer, which apparently has been like quite a banger in the Japanese meta. This is a card that I was kind of confused about when I saw it in decks like Tivit. And then seeing those player profiles where they talked about Weathered Wayfarer being the best card in multiple decks or the top performer, maybe a card to think about more. We've got staples in mana production here for Bant decks. We've got the Bloom Tender, which is crazy with Derevi, Cloud of Fairies, bonkers magic card with Cradle focused decks, Fairy Mastermind, Volatile Stormdrake, and Gilded Drake, first of those we've seen today. Ghostly Pilferer, again, a card that has been a staple and pops up in Japan a lot more than it does here now. Does make breaching through it tough. People cast commanders, you get to draw a card. You know, Hashaton might also show people that this is just an okay magic card. Eldrazi Displacer, which is a flicker effect we can keep using. Delny, bonkers with Derevi. Yisan here, I think this is something we saw before too. Getting to Yisan multiple times, pop, pop, pop with Derevi can very easily get you into a win. Enduring Curiosity, this is a card I've been wondering about, and we also haven't seen any Enduring Vitalities today. Curiosity is a card I've been wondering about. Flash mass Curiosity to your board that's hard to deal with. That can be a lot of draw triggers in a deck that's already looking to attack to get value. Enduring Curiosity can help convert that, you know, mana production brokenness of Derevi into actual cards and really, really clean the game up quickly. Emil here for ridiculous combo applications with Derevi and things like Gaia's Cradle or Bloom Tender. We got the Roaming Throne on Wizard, doubling up some of that too. Phyrexian Metamorph as a clone, Sowing Microspawn where Cradle-centric deck makes sense. Stunt double, we see this in Japan a lot. One issue with clones is sometimes there's nothing to do, sometimes there's nothing to copy, so getting to hold it up and flash in when there is something great to do makes a lot of sense. Toski and Orin Frostfang, again, like I mentioned, helping us convert that, you know, an attack plan into card advantage. And then Peregrine Drake, combo central, combos with Emil, free creature, often mana positive. Sorcery is just 3 tutors with Wargate, Eldritch, and Finale. Relatively low in the instance. We got to make room for those creatures somehow, right? Free interaction like Flare, Fierce. This is often a very good Flare deck because you don't mind Derevi going back to the command zone because it's so cheap to put into play. And sometimes you might just want that Derevi ETB, and this can get you, you know, access to it potentially at instant speed. Kind of the best of interaction. Crop Rod is here, of course. Good tutors like Eladamri's Call. Relatively low artifact count. We got a lot of dorks and lots of land mana. We got the map to help us find that Cradle. And then we got Birthing Pod, which is very breakable with Derevi, of course. And the One Ring, which is one of the most breakable cards with Derevi. Enchantments, we've got mostly mana ramp and then ways to get cards with Remora, Ristic Study, and Sylvan Library. 31 lands, relatively high count. Of course, we got the Cradle and Manamo. Not much else in terms of utility. We do have Horizon lands, no Surveil land to my eyes. But yeah, Derevi, very popular over in Japan. Popular still over here too. Not really converting all that much, but it is a deck that a lot of people, it's kind of beloved and has gotten a new identity and then got one taken away from it after it lost Nadu. That was a really sick kind of thing it got to do. One Ring, Cradle, nonsense. It's some of the most fun and powerful stuff you can do in cEDH, and we have it here at 4th place. All right, we're now getting into our top 4, which, like I mentioned, will include the top 3 performing decks from the Swiss, as well as the previous God of Commander. And first, we are taking a look at Marath, or Marath. I've never covered this. This is the first time. This is like a super well-known commander, popular historically, has lots of combo application, but I have never covered it. For Naya, you get a elemental beast, and it enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. So it scales based on, you know, commander attacks, things like that. And you can spend X, remove X +1/+1 counters from Marath, and choose one. You can either put those +1/+1 counters on target creature, have Marath deal X damage to target creature or player, or put an XX green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So you can see that if we're able to infinitely cast our commander or infinitely put counters on it, we can have an outlet here very cleanly to deal infinite damage to the table. There seems, just reading it, you can see lots of potential to move counters around and do some shenanigans. Let's see what we can figure out. Vivian on the Hunt is here, just a powerful card, and also means we're probably on the Rector, Karmic Guide, Kiki Jiki, Felidar shenanigans. It's right there. This deck doesn't assemble it like Rocco does, But Marath is the 3-drop to get you started with Vivian. Cryptic Trilobite, a staple of weird combo creature decks. XX enters with X +1/+1 counters on it. Remove a +1/+1 counter from it. Add double colorless. Spin the spin only to activate abilities. And then spin 1, tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So when we put a counter on this, we get 2 mana that we can use for more abilities. So with a Hardened Scales type effect, which I'm guessing we've got in here, isn't this one? Kami of Whispered Hopes? One of more +1/+1. Yeah, with like Kami of Whispered Hopes, I'm guessing we have like actual Hardened Scales, maybe? Hardened Scales. We can basically spend 1 on Marath to net multiple mana with Trilobite, putting counters back and forth between them, netting counters or mana as we go, and then kill off the table. So any kind of counter shenanigans you might be able to see in this deck is probably going to link back to that, or just using it with Marath anyways to power out something else. Kind of stapley good stuff cards like the Weathered Wayfarer, which is apparently pretty broken. Archivist of Ogma, Abolisher, Aven Mind Sensor, we don't see a ton of, but in these kind of colors, getting to slow down people, early tutors into early win attempts, easy way to get blown out before you get to really set up with your Naya deck. First Enduring Vitality appearance, and it's appearing with Enduring Innocence, which is whenever one or more other creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, draw a card. Ability triggers only once each turn, and then when it dies, it comes back like the other Enduring creatures. We got Fabro Elder, Kutzel. We got Solvala Explorer Returned, which has each player reveal the top of their library. For each downland card revealed this way, you add green and you gain a life, then each player draws a card. Notable rules, nonsense card, Solvala. The Jolly Balloon Man, which is pretty hot. Sort of a Kiki Jiki-like effect. Village Bellringer to combo with the Kiki Jiki effects. We got Sowing Mycospawn Spawn because we were almost certainly a Cradle deck with all these creatures. Welcoming Vampire also drawing us cards, similar to Enduring Innocence. Bright Glass Gearhulk, new one to get to talk about from Aether Drift. Green, green, white, white, first strike trample. ETB, you search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, and or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less. Reveal them, put them in your hand, and shuffle. We can get our Hardened Scales and our Cryptic Trilobite. That's pretty good. Probably other combos we immediately assemble too. That's a pretty good one in this deck specifically. Seeing green white decks just talk about this card in general, but this lines up just like perfectly. Just build your combo right there. We got both the Rectors, Academy, and Arena. We'll see what enchantments we're going for. And then we got the Dalseem to help convert cards, with our creatures attacking into cards. Got the Tymna text on there. Sorceries, Last Chance, and then 2 creature tutors. We got the Final Fortune, Crop Rot, Blast Effects, Tutors, Raven Charm, so you can use it to kill a creature, destroy an enchantment, or get rid of graveyards, which can be really nice. Flare of Fortitude, help to protect our combo. Force of Vigor, SWAT, more interaction. We got fast mana here. Chrome Mox, not a ton of it. No Mox Diamond. How many lands are we on? 31? No Mox Diamond? Could be a budget constraint, thing to consider. One Ring, Birthing Pod, Bangers. Lots of enchantments. So we got the Carpet, Hardened Scales, Sprawl, Growth, Survival of the Fittest to help us assemble these combos. Cicasia's Welcome. Whenever one or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Triggers only once each turn. Another similar effect like the Welcoming Vampire type of deal. Unbound Flourishing. 2 and a green when you cast a permanent spell with a mana value that contains X, double the value of X. Works with our Trilobite, our Finale of Devastation, Chord of Calling, Hydra Staple. Smothering Tithe and Troubling Pairs is value engines. And then 31 lands. We got the Cradle, Lazotep Quarry to crack those Rectors. Presumably we're getting Hardened Scales more often than not with those. Maybe also Survival of the Fittest with the Arena Rector for what enchantment we get. Could also be the Unbound Flourishing or Welcoming. Not really sure. I mean, it's good utility of those kind of cards. Good Naya mana base, Cavern of Souls naming Beast, question mark. Oh, probably Elemental. Marath, a deck that has like a lot of fans, especially like players who've been around for a while, kind of remember the old times of decks like this. Goofy creature shenanigans that they get to get up to. Getting top 4 here at this very large Japanese event. Second place, we have Tymna Kraum. Again, this is second, kind of fourth. I put the returning God of Commander kind of as the second, or first. The gods will be at the top. But speaking of gods, we have the 5-time God of Commander here. Made it to top 4, even having to work his way up there. Still almost got there. More or less staples of these decks. Ledger Shredder, not super popular in Tymna Kraum anymore. But we got the Fairy Mastermind, Archivist, Loyal Apprentice, Delny, Facebreaker, Ranger Captain, very popular stuff. Mockingbird. Again, less of an emphasis on clones right now in the format, but Mockingbird is just so good with Ranger Captain. Metamorph is just so much utility. Sorceries, we got the Tutors, including Praetor's Grasp, Jeska's Will, Savine's Wreck, so again, no wheel. Instants, we got Offer, Culling, Dark Grit, Reign of Filth, again, fairly popular. Into the Flood Maw, we got the Final Fortune, Intuition, Deadly Rollick again here, so some pretty similar stuff to what we saw in the other TNK. Artifacts, no One Ring, yet again. Soul Ring, Petal. I wonder how often this Mopal is on only 10 artifacts. It's so low. Facebreaker helps though. I guess Metamorph. 2 Talisman effects. And then enchantments. Same thing we saw as last time with the Dress Down, Smothering Tithe, Rhystic Mystic, Breach, of course. And then 28 lands. We are in the Cavern. Fire of Industry here. Fairly standard mana base. The previous god, 5-time god, unsurprisingly, did very well at this event. Then we have our previous God of Commander, not quite getting there this time to reclaim the title, but we've got Tivit, Seller of Secrets. We got the Teferi, Kitten, Urza, Emrakul. This is a deck list I've played, tweaked quite a bit, messed around with my own version, had other people reach out to me about it and tweaking it for like the American metagame. Weathered Wayfarer, apparently a banger. Bowmasters, Metamorph as a clone, Mockingbird as well. No Grand Abolisher, quite notable. Maybe a concession of that. Maybe it's, some people worry about it being too scary. It only helps you win. Personally, I think winning is pretty good. I'm a big fan. But also maybe not needing that much of that effect when you have Ranger Captain Teferi Silence. Maybe just not wanting as much of it, but no Grand Abolisher is pretty notable. Sorceries, we do have Twister as a wheel effect here. This list kind of most famous for its heavy inclusion of board wipes. You got the Deluge and Vanquish the Horde here. DT, Imp Seal, Sevrek, and Transmute as a tutor. Removal, we got Swords and Path. Run the Strict Serenade to interact. Trick Bind, Snap, Muddle the Mixture, which can, of course, double up to go get win cons. No Offer You Can't Refuse, Into the Flood Maw, any of that stuff. Keeping it relatively clean, we are on the Limdual's Vault as another top deck tutor. Waterlogged Teachings, not a very popular cEDH card. It's a 4-mana instant. Search your library for an instant card or a card with flash. Reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle, which is okay. And then on the back is a tap blue-black land. So not the freest include compared to something like Sink into Stupor, which has a cost at being a 1-color land, but is also getting to come into play untapped, which is pretty huge. Artifacts, a whole bunch. We got the Keys, Disruptor Flute, which is super overperformed for me every time I've seen this card. This card is very powerful. I think more cEDH decks should consider it, especially if you're Sans blue, but even blue decks with sort of an artifact theme or lots of like artifact utility stuff like this deck is doing. Got the map to find specific lands, help clean up our mana base, keep our land drops flowing. Dryonic Resonator, which is 2 mana and you pay 2, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. This is just free with Tivit. You get to 2 treasures off of Tivit, so this just pays for itself to get extra Tivit triggers, and then anything else it might do can be pretty good. It can also copy something like Repurposing Bay, which is a new addition to the deck, or Time Sieve to take 2 extra turns, which is really, really, really busted. Purposing Bay is the artifact birthing pod, 2 and a blue. 2, tap, sack an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card, mana value equal to 1 plus the artifact's mana value. Activate only as a sorcery, so you can turn your key into a Time Sieve, or your Grim Monolith into a Staff of Completion, or your staff into Clock of Omens, which is also here. Clock of Omens is a card I've been playing a lot with because I've been playing Magda recently, and one thing I noticed is it just seems powerful. No one will let you resolve it in Magda if they can help it because it's just super red alert. But in a deck like this that can just deploy it for value, it's kind of like a key with other utility, or just being able to like tap it and other artifacts, untap your One Ring, untap your Repurposing Bay, your Wishclaw Talisman. There is a lot of overlap with this, especially because we have lots of other artifacts lying around like clue tokens potentially. This can go pretty crazy. I think this is really hot tech. I don't think my artifact count I can support it in like Rogthras, but this kind of card isn't something I've been thinking about. And it with the Stryonic Resonator and the Repurposing Bay, I think that overlap. Same with like Staff of Completion to an extent too. There's definitely something here. This is something to think about in a deck exactly like Tivit that's like a mid-rangey artifact focused list. Clock of Omens, not even just for pure combo application, definitely something to think about. Actually, does this go infinite with Stryonic Resonator? Because you have them in play, spin 2, copy the Tivit trigger, make 2 treasures, 3 artifacts, tap 2 artifacts, untap Resonator, crack the treasures, you get infinite stuff. I don't think you get to convert that into mana though, but that at least gets you infinite clues. And then you can infinitely Clock of Omens for like infinite mana and definitely win. So there is some combo application for that, for sure. Black Market Connections we saw in the last list, copy artifact, touch the Spirit Realm, Smothering Tithe. Again, no like copy enchantment effects. 29 lands still in the Archway of Innovation, Cavern of Souls, Fomori Vault. This is a list that kind of has like leaned into the mana filtering lands, but leaning into that to fix the mana base. We definitely seems like Japanese players are really fixated on making sure their mana functions properly, not just hoping it works itself out, which I really respect. Returning God of Commander has some really cool spice. Definitely a big shakeup. Wonder what we'll see from him in the next one, but really cool stuff. Clock of Omens is pretty hot. I'm thinking about that in decks now. But our new God of Commander, here we have Najeela. Deck that hasn't been doing that great over in the US meta. A deck that we just saw earlier in a very turbo-focused kind of looking list. And then this is fairly different. We got Rograk here is a free warrior. Impulsive Pilferer is kind of hot, like Corvold tech, really. When it dies, create a treasure token. It has Encore for 3 in a red, which makes 3 copies of it with haste. And you sack them at the beginning of the end step. Gets you treasures. We got Delighted Halfling, Birds, Deathrite Shaman, Hierarch. Both of them here in this version. Both Spirit Guides, cards that combo. Again, no Grand Abolisher. So we're kind of seeing a theme here of players opting not to Abolisher. Maybe because it makes them pure more scary. It's about as scary as Cutzel is, but you can Green Suns Cutzel into play. We got the Last Chance, Infernal Plunge, Rite of Flame. So more red mana leaning here. DT, Intent, Imp Seal. We do have a wheel here. Kind of interesting that like the other faster slanting decks with less creatures were not on the wheel, but here we see the wheel in this deck. Instance, we got the Pact, both of them. Tutors, we got the Veil of Summer. Manamorphose, a card we've seen. Makes me think we're more likely on Necro as well. So we see the Cabal Rit also. Really cool thing with this. One, it just helps you fix your mana in a 5-color deck. Green or red is pretty easy. We lean on both of those colors typically in the early game, so it's not too awkward for us. And then it really cleans up like Necropotence end step lines of, do I leave up mana for Born or do I leave up mana for Final Fortune? Here I have access to both. I can just convert my colors. Another theme you'll see here, no Flood Caller here, but got the Last Chance to go with like a big Necro or Nas, and same thing with the Final Fortune and Born. And we got the Nas, which I know is how they won the final pod, was they were in 4th seat and won with a, from what I heard, a well-timed ad Nas, probably at instant speed. SWAT, Intuition, Rollick, 12 artifacts. We are on the ring, Soul Ring, 2 Talismans, and then Wish Claw. Pretty common thing we're seeing here is just Signet, Felwar Stone, and then not messing with other talisman effects, not looking as popular. There's the Necro, Breach, Rhystic Mystic, and then 28 lands on the City of Traders. No Forbidden Orchard this time. That's probably why they won. And then no budget constraints here in the mana base, just dual lands, rainbow lands, soul lands, and that's where we're at. Here, your winner, Najeela, with, of course, the most powerful commander in the format, Rograk, probably carrying the whole thing. Excellent stuff here. Super sick deck lists. So let me know down below which of these decks was your favorite. I am super biased. It's Rog Tymna for me. I'm building that deck. I'm going to be looking at deck lists right after this, trying to figure out what I want to put together and trying to get that together. Excited to play with some Mardu. I haven't ever like actually constructed a Mardu shell myself before, so I'm looking forward to getting to do that. Get to cast more Nauses and Necros. I don't really get to do that too often with Rog Drafts, but hopefully you enjoyed this video. If not, let me know why, and let me know what you would like to see next time either way. With all that being said though, thanks so much for watching, and as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.